The family courthouse in downtown Springfield smelled like old wood and broken dreams. I'd driven past this building 100 times before, never thinking I'd be sitting inside, fighting for my own daughter. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows across the worn linoleum floors. Everything about this place felt designed to make you feel small. I adjusted my black blazer for the third time, the one I'd borrowed from my sister because I couldn't afford anything new. My palms were sweating as I gripped the folder containing every piece of evidence I could gather. Report cards showing Olivia's good grades, medical records proving I'd never missed an appointment, bank statements showing every penny spent on her needs. 3 months of preparation, and still my hands wouldn't stop shaking. Across the narrow aisle, David sat with his expensive lawyer, the kind who wore Italian shoes and charged more per hour than I made in a week. His mother, Margaret, sat behind him like a queen holding court, her pearl necklace catching the light every time she turned to whisper something in his ear. They looked so confident, so prepared. I felt like I was drowning before we even started. The bailiff called our case number and my heart hammered against my ribs. This wasn't just about custody schedules or weekend visits. This was about whether a judge would believe I was fit to raise my own child, whether 3 years of sleepless nights, scraped knees kissed better, and bedtime stories counted for anything in this sterile room. My court-appointed attorney, Sarah Chen, gave me a reassuring squeeze on the shoulder. She was young, maybe 5 years out of law school, but she'd listened to my story without judgment. Still, I could see the worry in her eyes. We both knew David's family had resources I couldn't match. When I finally spotted Olivia sitting with the court representative, my chest tightened. She wore the sky blue dress I'd sewn for her 7th birthday, the one with tiny flowers along the collar. Her dark hair was braided exactly how she liked it, and her little legs swung nervously from the chair. She looked so much like me at that age. Same stubborn chin, same way of chewing her lower lip when scared. I wanted to run to her, to scoop her up and carry her out of this awful place. Instead, I sat frozen, watching my baby girl try to make sense of why all these adults were talking about her like she wasn't even there. The court representative, a woman named Mrs. Patterson, kept glancing between Olivia and the rest of us, her expression unreadable. Judge Morrison entered, and everyone stood. He was older than I'd expected, with gray hair and reading glasses perched on his nose. As he settled into his chair and opened our file, I prayed he would see past the lawyers and the accusations to the truth, that somehow, in this room full of strangers deciding my fate, someone would remember that mothers and children belong together. David's lawyer stood first, straightening his tie like he was about to perform on stage. His voice filled the courtroom with the kind of authority that comes from years of winning cases and billing high fees. He painted a picture of me that I barely recognized. Unstable, financially irresponsible, emotionally unfit. Each word felt like a physical blow. Then Margaret rose from her seat, clutching a manila folder like it contained state secrets. She'd always been theatrical, even at family dinners when David and I were still married. Her voice dripped with false concern as she addressed the judge. "Your Honor, I've watched this situation unfold for months with growing alarm." She opened the folder and pulled out printed screenshots. These are from her social media accounts. Late-night posts, complaining about being tired, about struggling to make ends meet. Is this the kind of stability a child needs? I stared at her in disbelief. Those posts were from the hardest days, when Olivia had been sick with pneumonia and I'd been up for 72 hours straight. I'd reached out to my online mom groups for support, for someone to tell me I wasn't failing. Now those moments of vulnerability were being twisted into evidence against me. "She's never held a steady job for more than 6 months," Margaret continued, her voice growing stronger. "She moved 3 times last year alone. Olivia needs consistency, not chaos." Sarah started to object, but Margaret wasn't finished. She pulled out more papers, copies of my apartment lease, my employment history, even grocery receipts she must have gotten from David somehow. Every struggle I'd faced as a single mother was laid bare for the judge to examine. The worst part came when I saw my own mother walking through the courtroom doors. Linda Peterson, the woman who'd raised me to believe family came first, who'd taught me that mothers protect their children above all else. My stomach dropped as she took a seat behind David's family. When called to speak, she stood slowly, avoiding my eyes. Her voice shook slightly as she began. I love my daughter, but I'm worried about her judgment. The divorce was difficult for everyone. She's been angry, resentful. I don't think she's thinking clearly about what's best for Olivia. The betrayal hit me like ice water. This was the woman who'd sung me lullabies, who'd held me when I cried over scraped knees and broken hearts. Now she stood in a courtroom full of strangers, agreeing that I wasn't fit to raise my own child. My hands started trembling so violently I had to clasp them together in my lap. Sarah leaned over and whispered that we'd have our turn to respond, but I could barely hear her over the roaring in my ears. Everything felt surreal, like watching someone else's nightmare unfold. When Margaret sat back down, she looked satisfied, like a cat who'd cornered a mouse. David's lawyer nodded approvingly and made notes on his legal pad. Even the court reporter seemed to be typing faster, as if the drama was too good to miss. I looked at Olivia, still sitting quietly with Mrs. Patterson. She was staring at her hands, probably confused about why Grandma Linda was saying bad things about Mommy. My heart broke all over again, knowing that no matter what happened next, she would remember this day forever. While Margaret's words still echoed in the courtroom, my mind drifted to the kitchen of our tiny apartment on Maple Street. Last Tuesday morning, when Olivia woke up with a fever of 102, I'd called in sick to my job at the insurance office, knowing it meant losing a day's pay I couldn't afford to lose. But there was no question. She needed me. I spent that entire day switching between cool washcloths on her forehead and spooning chicken soup into her mouth. She was so weak she could barely lift her head, but she kept apologizing for making me miss work. 7 years old, and she was already worried about money because she'd heard me on the phone with the electric company too many times. Nobody in this courtroom knew about the night I found her crying in her bedroom because kids at school had made fun of her thrift store shoes. I'd stayed up until 2 a.m. decorating those shoes with fabric markers and glitter, turning them into something magical. The next morning, she skipped to the bus stop, proud to show off her designer sneakers. They didn't know about the grocery store math I did every week, counting and recounting items to make sure we had enough for the basics. How I'd put back the name brand cereal and grab the generic kind, but always made sure she had the lunch meat she liked for her sandwiches. The times I ate peanut butter for dinner so she could have the chicken breast. Margaret talked about my social media posts like they were evidence of instability, but she didn't see the context. That post about being exhausted at midnight wasn't because I was out partying. I was researching Olivia's science project on volcanoes, printing pictures at the 24-hour Kinko's because our printer was broken. She won first place in the science fair, and the look of pride on her face made every lost hour of sleep worth it. The 3 apartment moves Margaret mentioned. The first was because our landlord sold the building. The second was because the heating didn't work, and Olivia was getting sick constantly. The third was to get her into the better school district, even though it meant I'd have a longer commute to work. Every move was about giving her a better life, not creating chaos. David's family saw inconsistency where I saw adaptation. They saw struggle where I saw sacrifice. When Margaret mentioned my job changes, she didn't explain that I'd left the department store because they wouldn't give me time off for Olivia's parent-teacher conferences. I'd left the diner because working nights meant I couldn't help with homework or tuck her in. I remembered last Christmas, when I'd worked double shifts for 2 months to buy her the bicycle she'd been wanting. It wasn't the fanciest one in the store, but I'd wrapped it in paper covered with drawings I'd made myself. When she saw it Christmas morning, she'd hugged me so tight I thought my heart might burst. "This is the best Christmas ever, Mommy," she'd whispered against my neck. Those were the moments that mattered. Not the bank statements or the apartment leases or the late-night posts when I needed someone to remind me I wasn't alone. But how do you present love as evidence? How do you submit bedtime stories and goodnight kisses and homemade Halloween costumes to a court file? Sitting in that hard wooden chair, listening to my life being dissected by people who'd never lived it, I realized that the most important parts of being Olivia's mother weren't things that could be documented. They were in the 1,000 tiny moments that happened when no one else was watching, when it was just the 2 of us against the world, figuring it out together. Judge Morrison was asking David's lawyer to clarify something about my employment record when I heard a chair scrape against the floor. The sound was so soft I almost missed it, but something made me turn around. Olivia was standing up from her seat next to Mrs. Patterson, her small hands gripping the edge of the wooden bench. Mrs. Patterson immediately reached for her arm, whispering something I couldn't hear. But Olivia shook her head with a determination I recognized. The same stubborn streak that got her in trouble at school sometimes, but also helped her stick up for kids who were being picked on. She stepped into the aisle, her Mary Jane shoes clicking against the floor. "Excuse me," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. The entire courtroom fell silent. Judge Morrison looked surprised, his eyebrows raising as he leaned forward in his chair. David's lawyer stopped mid-sentence, his mouth hanging open slightly. "Sweetheart, you need to sit down," Mrs. Patterson said gently, standing up to guide Olivia back to her seat. But my daughter looked up at her with those big brown eyes and said something that made my heart stop. "Please, ma'am. I need to tell them something important." The bailiff started moving toward her, but Judge Morrison held up his hand. "Wait," he said quietly. He studied Olivia for a long moment, then asked, "What's your name, young lady?" "Olivia Marie Thompson, sir." Her voice was getting stronger, more confident. "I'm 7 years old, and I want to tell you about my mom." I felt Sarah's hand on my arm, probably worried about where this was heading. David was leaning forward in his seat, his face pale. Margaret looked like she'd swallowed something sour. But I couldn't take my eyes off my daughter, standing there in her blue dress like she was about to give a school presentation. "I know I'm not supposed to talk in court," Olivia continued, looking directly at Judge Morrison. "But my mom always tells me to speak up when something isn't fair, and what they're saying about her isn't fair." She turned to face Margaret, and I saw something in her expression I'd never seen before, a kind of adult seriousness that didn't belong on a 7-year-old's face. "Grandma Margaret, you don't live with us. You don't see what my mom does for me every day." Margaret's face went red, but she didn't say anything. Olivia kept talking, her voice growing stronger with each word. "When I was sick last month, my mom stayed home from work and made me soup and read me stories all day. She didn't go to work because she wanted to take care of me. And when Tommy Jenkins said my shoes were ugly, she made them beautiful with glitter and flowers." Some people in the courtroom started shifting in their seats. I heard someone sniffle behind me. Olivia walked closer to where I was sitting, but she kept talking to the judge. "My mom works really hard so I can have nice things. Sometimes she's tired, but she still helps me with my homework. She makes funny voices when she reads me stories. She teaches me how to be brave and kind." My vision blurred with tears. I wanted to reach out and hug her, but I didn't dare move. She was doing something incredible, something I could never have asked her to do. "Grandma Linda," Olivia said, turning to my mother, "you taught my mom to be a good person. Why are you saying she's not?" My mother's face crumpled. She covered her mouth with her hand and looked away. I could see her shoulders shaking. Olivia walked back to the center of the courtroom, facing the judge again. "I love my daddy, and I want to see him, but I want to live with my mom. She's the one who takes care of me when I'm scared or sick or sad. She's the one who knows I don't like the crusts on my sandwiches and that I need my nightlight to sleep." The courtroom was completely quiet, except for the sound of people crying. Even the court reporter had stopped typing, her hands frozen over the keys. "Please don't take me away from my mom," Olivia said, her voice breaking for the first time. "She's the best mom in the whole world, and I need her." After Olivia finished speaking, the silence stretched for what felt like forever. Judge Morrison sat back in his chair, removing his glasses to clean them slowly. When he looked up again, his whole demeanor had changed. The formal distance was gone, replaced by something softer, more human. "Thank you, Olivia," he said gently. "That was very brave of you. Mrs. Patterson, would you please take her back to her seat?" As Olivia walked back to her chair, I caught her eye for just a moment. She gave me the tiniest smile, the same one she used when she was proud of herself for tying her shoes or finishing a hard puzzle. My heart felt like it might explode from love and pride and fear all mixed together. The atmosphere in the courtroom had completely changed. Margaret was staring at her hands, her earlier confidence nowhere to be found. David's expensive lawyer was shuffling through his papers like he'd lost his place. Even the bailiff seemed affected, wiping his eyes when he thought nobody was looking. My mother was crying openly now, tears streaming down her cheeks. She kept looking at me, then at Olivia, like she was seeing us both clearly for the first time in months. I wanted to feel angry at her, to hold on to the hurt of her betrayal. but watching her fall apart made me remember the woman who used to braid my hair and kiss my scraped knees. Judge Morrison called for a 15-minute recess. As people filed out of the courtroom, several strangers stopped to nod at me or squeeze my shoulder. An older woman with gray hair leaned down and whispered, "Your daughter is something special. You should be proud." In the hallway, I found a quiet corner and tried to pull myself together. Sarah sat beside me, offering tissues from her purse. "That was incredible," she said. "I've never seen anything like it in all my years of practice." I couldn't speak yet. My throat felt raw from holding back tears, and my hands were still shaking. Everything Olivia had said played over and over in my mind. She'd seen me, really seen me, in ways I didn't even know she understood. David appeared in front of me suddenly, his face flushed and uncertain. For a moment, I thought he was going to say something cruel, to somehow turn even this against me. Instead, he sat down heavily in the chair across from mine. "She's right, you know," he said quietly. "About you being a good mom. I've been so angry about everything else that I forgot that part." I stared at him, not sure I'd heard correctly. This was the man who'd stood by while his mother attacked my character, who'd hired lawyers to paint me as unfit. "I never wanted it to get this ugly," he continued, his voice barely above a whisper. "My mom, she gets in my head sometimes. Makes me think I need to fight harder, win bigger." But listening to Olivia just now, he trailed off, shaking his head. Behind him, I could see Margaret pacing near the elevator, talking rapidly on her phone. She looked frustrated, probably calling her country club friends to complain about how the hearing was going. Some people never learn to admit when they're wrong. When we returned to the courtroom, Judge Morrison's tone was completely different. He asked gentler questions, focused more on what would be best for Olivia, rather than who could prove the other parent was worse. He spoke directly to both David and me about co-parenting and putting our daughter's needs first. I found myself breathing easier for the first time all day. Maybe it was Olivia's words, or maybe it was seeing David remember who I used to be before all the anger and lawyers got in the way. Either way, something fundamental had shifted in that room, and I could feel it in every person sitting on those hard wooden benches. Judge Morrison's final decision came 2 hours later. He granted me primary custody, with David getting alternating weekends and 1 evening per week. The judge specifically mentioned Olivia's testimony, saying it was clear she had a strong, healthy attachment to me, and that disrupting that would not serve her best interests. As he read the custody arrangement, I felt a mixture of relief and exhaustion wash over me. We'd won, but the victory felt hollow after everything we'd been through. This wasn't supposed to be about winning or losing. It was supposed to be about what was best for our daughter. David's lawyer packed up his papers quickly, avoiding eye contact with everyone. Margaret stormed out of the courtroom without saying goodbye to anyone, not even Olivia. I heard her heels clicking angrily down the hallway, probably already planning her next move or her next complaint. But David surprised me again. He walked over to where Olivia was standing with Mrs. Patterson and knelt down to her level. "I'm proud of you for being so brave today," he told her. "And you're right about your mom. She is pretty amazing." Olivia hugged him tightly. "I love you too, Daddy. I just want everyone to stop being mad at each other." Out of the corner of my eye, I saw my mother approaching slowly. She looked older than when she'd walked in that morning, like the weight of what she'd done was finally hitting her. When she reached us, she didn't say anything at first, just stood there crying. "I'm sorry," she finally whispered. "I'm so sorry, honey. I got caught up in all the anger and forgot what really mattered. You're a wonderful mother, and I should have said that from the beginning." I wanted to forgive her immediately, the way I always had when I was a kid, but some wounds take time to heal, and this betrayal would be one of them. "I know you are, Mom," I said quietly, "but it's going to take time." She nodded, understanding. "I'll wait as long as it takes. I just want my daughter and granddaughter back in my life." Sarah helped me gather all the paperwork, explaining the next steps and when the custody arrangement would officially begin. As we walked out of the courthouse, Olivia slipped her hand into mine. The late afternoon sun felt warm on our faces after the cold fluorescent lights inside. "Mommy, are you happy now?" she asked as we walked to our car. I thought about the question. I was relieved, certainly, grateful that we could stay together. but happy felt like too simple a word for everything I was feeling. "I'm happy that we get to keep being a family," I told her. "Just you and me, figuring things out together." She nodded seriously. "I like when it's just us. We're a good team." "The best team," I agreed, squeezing her hand. As I buckled her into her car seat, I noticed she was still wearing the blue dress I'd sewn for her birthday. It had a small stain on the collar now from where she'd been nervous and chewing on the fabric, but she looked proud wearing it, like it was armor that had protected her through battle. Driving home through the familiar streets of Springfield, I realized that everything felt different now, not just because of the custody decision, but because of what Olivia had shown me about courage and truth. She'd stood up in that courtroom and defended our family when I couldn't find the words to do it myself. The apartment on Maple Street looked the same when we pulled into the parking lot, but it felt more like home than it ever had before. We were going to be okay. More than okay. We were going to build something beautiful together, just the two of us, one day at a time.